What if the person you thought was just a neighbor became the person who changed your life? It started with something so small, my neighbor walking into my room unannounced. But that single moment spiraled into a story I never expected. A story of tension, laughter, secrets, and a love that felt both terrifying and inevitable. This isn't just another BL webtoon moment. It's a true gay love story. My name is Daniel, and until that summer, I thought I had my life figured out. I lived in a small apartment complex, the kind where everyone knows each other's schedules. Mornings were filled with the sound of neighbors starting their cars, evenings with the smell of dinners drifting through open windows. And then there was Ethan. He lived just across the hall. My age, maybe a year older, but he carried himself with this effortless confidence that always set him apart. Tall, athletic, with hair that somehow looked good no matter how messy it was. His presence filled every space he walked into. Me? I was the quiet type. Books over bars, music over parties. I kept to myself, though I noticed him more than I should have. Sometimes in the mornings, our doors would open at the same time, and I'd catch him giving me that half smile as he locked his door. It was nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just the kind of small gesture that could seem insignificant to anyone else. But to me, it lingered, playing on a loop in the quiet corners of my mind long after we went our separate ways. That half smile carried a weight I couldn't name, a question I never dared to ask. Ethan wasn't a complicated person, or at least he didn't seem like one on the surface. He was the kind of guy who moved through life with an ease I envied, always laughing, always surrounded by people. He had friends coming over at odd hours, their voices echoing down the narrow hallway of our apartment complex. Sometimes, when the walls seemed too thin, I'd lie in bed listening to their jokes and banter, the rise and fall of their laughter like a soundtrack I wasn't part of but secretly wished I was. I told myself I didn't mind being left out. I had my own life, my books, my quiet music, the sketches I never showed anyone. I wasn't lonely, or at least that's what I repeated whenever the silence in my room pressed down too hard. But then Ethan's voice would carry through the wall, low, warm, easy, and the silence felt less like loneliness and more like a pause, a waiting space filled with something I couldn't quite admit. Every interaction we had was brief, a nod in the stairwell, a quick exchange about the weather or the mail that had been misplaced. Once, when I dropped my groceries and an apple rolled toward his door, he picked it up and handed it back with a grin that made my chest feel tight. That was the thing about him. He never seemed to realize the effect he had. To him, it was casual, everyday life. To me, it was something I carried around for hours, sometimes days. And then there were the mornings. Those mornings when fate, or maybe just poor timing, lined up our routines so that we stepped into the hall at the exact same moment. He'd be in his faded jeans and a hoodie, keys dangling from his fingers, hair sticking up like he hadn't bothered to fix it after waking up. I'd be in my usual hurry, fumbling with my bag, trying to look composed when I knew I wasn't. Our eyes would meet. His half smile would appear, soft, almost teasing, but never mocking. It wasn't the kind of smile that demanded a response. It was just there, hanging between us, fleeting but heavy all at once. And then he'd look away, lock his door, and head down the hall. I'd follow, always a few steps behind, pretending that the way my heart raced was just morning nerves, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the mornings. It wasn't just the thin walls and the sound of his laughter. It was everything. The way he leaned against the railing on the stairs, scrolling through his phone, his shoulders relaxed, like the world wasn't pressing down on him the way it did on me. The way he carried bags of groceries with one hand effortlessly while I struggled with mine. The way he always seemed to belong wherever he was while I was constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I fit at all. I found myself anticipating his presence in ways I couldn't admit out loud. I'd time my trips to the mailbox hoping I'd see him there. I'd linger by my door in the evenings, pretending to fix something just to catch a glimpse when his friends left. It was pathetic, maybe, but it was also the truth. There was something about him that pulled me in, like gravity. But I didn't let myself believe it meant anything, because why would it? He was the kind of guy who probably had a girlfriend, or at least the option of one if he wanted. He was confident, charming, the kind of person people naturally gravitated toward. I was me, quiet, reserved, watching from the sidelines. So I kept it all to myself. Still, the half smiles kept coming. The laughter through the walls kept drifting into my room, wrapping around me in ways I couldn't shut out. Slowly, without realizing it, Ethan became the background rhythm of my days, the silent companion I never acknowledged but always felt. And maybe, just maybe, there was something in the way he lingered sometimes too, something in the way his eyes met mine, holding just a second too long before he looked away. One morning, I caught him staring first. I had stepped out into the hallway juggling my bag and a travel mug of coffee. He was already there locking his door. Our eyes met, and for once, he didn't smile right away. He just looked at me, steady, unreadable, for a beat longer than usual. Then finally, the corner of his mouth lifted, and he said, "Morning." It was such a simple word, ordinary. But my throat went dry, and I barely managed a quiet morning back. That day, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the pause before the smile, about the way it felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't imagining it all. And that was when it started, the quiet shift, the subtle unraveling of the line I had drawn between us. From then on, I noticed more, the way his laughter sometimes dropped into a softer tone, lower, gentler, when the night grew late and his friends had gone, the way he leaned against his door when talking to me, casual but with a closeness that made the space between us feel smaller than it was, the way he lingered after conversations, like he wasn't in a hurry to leave. It was dangerous the way I started to hope, because once hope takes root, it's hard to pull out. The thin walls stopped feeling like barriers and started feeling like threads connecting us. His voice became the backdrop to my nights, and that half smile became the highlight of my mornings. And I knew that something had shifted, even if neither of us said it out loud. We weren't strangers exactly. We nodded in passing, exchanged a few casual words. Neighbors, nothing more. But even then, there was something about him, something magnetic, something I tried to ignore. That summer, with classes out and the days long, I found myself alone most nights, scrolling through my phone, working on projects, playing music too quietly for anyone else to hear. And then it happened, the night that would change everything. It was late, close to midnight. The building was quiet, the kind of silence that stretched across the narrow hallways and pressed against the thin apartment walls. Outside, the city's hum had faded to a dull whisper. Distant traffic, the occasional bark of a stray dog, a siren that rose and disappeared into the night. Inside, everything felt still, suspended. I had left my door slightly ajar, just enough for the hallway air to drift in. The summer heat was merciless, even with the small fan whirring at the corner of the room. My skin clung to the sheets, and beads of sweat traced lazy lines down my temple. I tried reading, tried sketching, tried anything to distract myself, but the heat made every effort sluggish, unfocused. Eventually, I had surrendered, sprawling on the bed, half lost in my thoughts, drifting between wakefulness and something like dreaming. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow at first. Measured. The kind of sound that wouldn't have caught my attention if the building weren't so deathly quiet at this hour. Each step pressed into the wooden floorboards of the hallway, creaking faintly. My ears sharpened, my breath catching without my permission. No one usually wandered at this time of night. The neighbors on either side were older, retired couples who followed strict routines. Lights out by 10, quiet by 11. Midnight was an hour reserved for stillness, at least in this building. But the footsteps kept coming. I turned my head toward the door, my heart quickening. The small gap between the frame and the door showed only a sliver of darkness. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it, if maybe the restless quiet had started playing tricks on me. Then came the shadow. It flickered across the strip of light, stretching long against the wall, moving closer to my door. My body tensed. I should have gotten up, should have closed the door, should have locked it even. But I didn't move. Something rooted me in place. Curiosity, fear, anticipation, I couldn't tell which. My pulse hammered in my ears loud enough that I was certain whoever was outside could hear it too. The footsteps stopped. Right outside my door, I swallowed hard. My mouth suddenly dry, the silence stretched again. Heavier, now, threaded with the awareness that someone was standing there, just beyond the thin wooden barrier. And then the door creaked. Slowly, carefully, it swung inward, the strip of hallway light widening until it carved a golden rectangle across my floor. My breath hitched. Ethan. He stood there, framed by the dim glow of the hallway. His hair was tousled, damp at the edges as though he had just showered. A plain white t-shirt clung to his chest, and grey sweatpants hung loosely on his hips. Casual, effortless. Yet in that moment, he might as well have been something cinematic, larger than life. Our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. My throat worked, searching for words, but none came. He leaned casually against the doorframe, one hand braced against the wood, his silhouette cutting into the dark of my room. "You're awake," he said finally, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. I nodded, too quickly, shifting upright on the bed. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." My voice sounded smaller than I intended, swallowed by the night. He smiled, soft, crooked. "Figured I could hear your fan running." He stepped inside, slow, unhurried, as if my room was just another space he was welcome in. I should have stopped him, should have asked what he was doing, why he was here, why at midnight of all times. But the words stayed lodged in my chest, tangled with the pounding of my heart. He closed the door gently behind him, though not all the way. The crack of light still lingered. Then he crossed the room, each step quiet, purposeful, until he was close enough that I could feel the faint heat radiating from his body. "Hot tonight, huh?" His voice was casual, but there was something beneath it, something that made the air thicken. "Yeah," I managed, tugging at my damp shirt. Couldn't stand it. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, the open sketchbook on my desk, the fan whirring, the unmade bed where I sat perched awkwardly, as though unsure what to do with myself. Then his eyes settled back on me, and the corners of his mouth lifted again. "You look like you were a million miles away." I huffed a laugh, nervous, something like that. For a moment, silence pressed in again. But it wasn't empty, not the kind of silence that had filled the apartment before. This was heavier, loaded, buzzing like static between us. And then he moved closer. Not much, just a step, two at most. But it was enough to shrink the space, enough that I could smell the faint trace of soap clinging to his skin, sharp and clean. My chest tightened. "Do you mind?" he asked softly, nodding toward the edge of the bed. I shook my head before I could think better of it. "No, go ahead." He sat down, the mattress dipping under his weight. Too close, not close enough. My breath felt shallow and I forced myself to look anywhere but at him, at the wall, the fan, the crack of light at the door. But inevitably my gaze slid back to him, and he was already watching me. Something unspoken passed between us then, a current I couldn't name but felt all the same. My pulse raced, my palms damp against the sheets. He leaned back on his hands, casual, as if this were nothing unusual. "You always leave your door open like that?" I shook my head. "Not really, just tonight. Good thing you did." His voice was quiet now, softer, laced with something that made my stomach twist. "Why?" I asked, though my voice trembled. He tilted his head, studying me, "Because otherwise, I wouldn't be here." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. My chest ached with the weight of them. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, so I sat there, frozen, while Ethan's gaze lingered on me, steady, unflinching. And then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out. His fingers brushed against mine where my hand rested on the bed. Just a touch, barely there. But it sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric, like the air before a storm. I froze. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers lingered, tracing the edge of my hand, hesitant yet certain, testing the space between us. My breath caught, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it might shake the walls. "Ethan," I whispered, unsure if it was a question, a warning, or a plea. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur. "You don't have to say anything." And in that moment, late at night, in the stifling heat, with the door slightly ajar and the world held at bay, I realized everything had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. The distance between us wasn't distance at all. It was possibility. And then, without knocking, my door creaked open. Ethan stood there, casual, relaxed, like he had every right to be in my room. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that maybe he'd opened the wrong door, that he'd laugh it off and leave, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned casually against the doorframe, one hand still on the knob. "Your door was open," he said, like that explained everything. My pulse jumped. Yeah, I guess it was. Dangerous, you know," he added with a smirk. "Anyone could walk in." The way he said, "anyone" made my stomach twist. I sat up quickly, tugging at the hem of my shirt. "So, did you need something?" He shrugged, stepping inside before I could protest. "Not really. Just bored. Thought I'd see what you were up to." And just like that, he crossed the room. Not hesitating, not second-guessing, just moving with that effortless ease that always seemed to surround him, like the world naturally opened space for him wherever he went. He dropped onto my desk chair without asking, spinning once, the wheels squeaking faintly against the wooden floor. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if his presence had rearranged the air itself. His eyes roamed lazily across the clutter of my books, my half-finished sketches, the open notebook stacked unevenly, the faint music still playing from my speaker, something soft and wordless, filled the silence in a way that now felt too intimate. It was so casual, so natural, like he belonged there. But to me, every second felt loaded. I sat frozen on the bed, my knees pulled up slightly, as though I could shield myself from the weight of the moment. My fan hummed, blowing air that suddenly felt too hot, too dry, useless against the heat rising under my skin. He leaned back in the chair, letting it tilt just slightly, his hand brushing against the edge of my desk. He picked up a sketchbook without asking, flipping it open to the first page. My heart dropped. Don't. The word left my mouth too quickly, too sharp. He glanced at me, surprised but amused, that half smile already tugging at his lips. What? You don't want me to see? It's not finished, I stammered, heat rushing up my neck. He raised a brow but didn't close it. His fingers turned the page with agonizing slowness, his eyes scanning every line, every curve. I wanted to snatch it from his hands, to hide the messy strokes, the drafts that weren't ready for anyone's eyes. But I couldn't move, couldn't make myself cross the space between us. He looked up again, his gaze catching mine. You're good. The words were simple, casual even, but the way he said them, steady, certain, sent a tremor through me. I swallowed hard. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. He turned another page, his voice softer now, almost thoughtful. I didn't know you drew like this. You never told me. It's not important, I muttered, suddenly wishing the ground would open and swallow me whole. He tilted his head, studying one of the sketches, an unfinished portrait. The lines rough, the shading incomplete. It looks important to you. His words landed heavier than I expected. Important to you. He wasn't just looking at the paper. He was looking at me, through me, peeling back something I usually kept tightly shut. The silence stretched again, punctuated only by the quiet music from the speaker. He spun the chair halfway toward me, sketchbook still in his hands, and rested his chin in his palm. You always hide parts of yourself like this. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? He shrugged, but his eyes never left me. I mean, you keep your door half open, but never all the way. You let people hear you moving around, but not really see you. You laugh in groups, but when you're alone, you're different, like you're holding back. My breath caught. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off. But the way he said it, quiet, certain, almost too gentle, stripped me bare. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered, my voice unsteady. He didn't argue, didn't push. He just closed the sketchbook carefully, placing it back on the desk as though it was something fragile. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze steady and unflinching. You don't have to pretend with me. The words struck harder than they should have. My chest tightened, and I looked away, staring at the floor, at the edge of my sheets, anywhere but at him. I'm not pretending. Yeah, you are, he said softly. Not cruel, not accusing, just honest. But it's okay. Everyone does. Until they don't. The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy with the truth of what he'd said, heavy with everything unsaid between us. I forced a laugh, though it sounded thin. You sound like you're trying to psychoanalyze me. He smiled faintly. Maybe I am. Something in his voice made me glance up. His eyes were softer now, unreadable, but warm, like he was letting me see something rare. The kind of look that made the world tilt, even if only for a second. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to sit there with the weight of that gaze pressing into me. So I shifted, pulling my knees tighter to my chest, pretending to adjust the sheets. And then he asked, almost casually, do you ever draw people you know? My breath stilled. Sometimes, I admitted, cautiously. His smile grew. So, do I get a portrait? The question was teasing, light-hearted, but underneath I felt the ground shifting. I shook my head quickly. No way. Why not? He leaned back in the chair, grinning now. Afraid I'll look bad? I swallowed. It's not that. Then what? I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was there, lodged in my throat like a stone. I had drawn him. More than once. The sketches were buried in the back of another notebook, hidden under loose papers, shoved into drawers I never let anyone touch. Him laughing, him looking away, him sitting in the courtyard with the light catching his hair. The lines never quite captured what I saw, but they were enough to remind me, enough to betray me if anyone ever found them. So I said nothing, just shook my head again, avoiding his gaze. He let it go, or at least, he pretended to. He spun the chair lazily once more, tapping the armrest with his fingers. Fine, I'll wait. He'll come around eventually. The certainty in his voice made my stomach twist. I wanted to ask why he was here, why he came into my room at midnight, sat in my chair, touched the pieces of my life I usually kept hidden. I wanted to ask what he meant by pretending, by not having to. But instead, I stayed quiet. Because the truth scared me. And yet, I didn't want him to leave. He seemed to sense it. Because even without words, he didn't move toward the door. He stayed there, spinning once more in the chair before stopping and fixing me with that same steady gaze. You're hard to read, you know that, he said. I managed a weak laugh. So, I've been told. Well, he said, leaning back comfortably. Lucky for you, I'm patient. And with that, he leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes, as though he'd claim my room as his own without needing permission. The fan kept whirring, the music kept playing, and I sat there, caught between fear and something else I didn't dare name, because to him it was casual, natural, like he belonged there. But to me, every second felt like a choice. Every second felt like the beginning of something I couldn't turn away from anymore. I tried to act normal. We talked about nothing really. His summer job, the movie he'd just watched, the heat that made sleep impossible. But then there were the moments, the way his knee brushed mine when he leaned closer to point at a sketchbook lying open on the bed. The way his gaze lingered on me longer than necessary when I spoke. The silence that stretched too long before one of us broke it with a nervous laugh. Hours passed like minutes. And I realized something. I didn't want him to leave. That night became the first of many. Ethan started showing up unannounced more often, sometimes with an excuse. Wi-Fi's down, mind if I borrow yours? Sometimes with none at all. And each time, the distance between us shrank. We'd sit too close on the bed, shoulders touching, share popcorn during late-night movies, our fingers brushing in the bowl, talk about things we never admitted to anyone else. But with that closeness came confusion, because Ethan wasn't just my neighbor. He was everything I told myself I couldn't want. One night, as we watched a movie, he leaned back, stretching his arm across the couch behind me. It wasn't quite around me, but close enough that I could feel the heat of it. My chest tightened. I pretended to focus on the screen. But then, our hands collided in the popcorn bowl. His fingers didn't move away. Neither did mine. The silence between us roared louder than the movie. Ethan glanced at me, his expression unreadable. And for a second, I thought, this is it. But then he smiled faintly, pulling his hand back as if nothing had happened. And I was left reeling. What were we doing? Was it just teasing, curiosity, or something more? The uncertainty gnawed at me. Some nights, I swore I saw it in his eyes too, that same hesitation, that same pull. But neither of us said it, neither of us dared, because once the words were spoken, nothing could ever be the same. It happened on one of those restless nights, when the air felt too thick to breathe and the silence too heavy to bear. I was pacing my room when Ethan walked in again, no warning, no hesitation. This time, I didn't ask why. He closed the door behind him, leaned back against it, and said quietly, "Daniel, do you ever think about us?" My heart stopped. I stared at him, every excuse, every denial crumbling before I could even speak. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine, because I do. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I swallowed hard. Ethan. But he didn't let me finish. In 2 steps, he was right there, close enough that I could feel his breath. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against my jaw, tentative but certain. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, "and I will." I couldn't. The next second, his lips were on mine. It wasn't careful, it wasn't planned. It was desperate. Years of tension unraveling all at once. The kiss burned through me, breaking down every wall I had built. His hand tangled in my shirt, mine clutched at his wrist, pulling him closer. For that moment, the world outside didn't exist, just us, just this. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against mine. "So now you know," he murmured, and I did. I knew everything had changed. After that night, nothing was simple. We stumbled through the days, pretending nothing had happened, only to find ourselves drawn together again and again. The secrecy, the uncertainty, it was messy, complicated, terrifying, but it was real. And in the quiet moments, sharing headphones, late night walks, laughter echoing down empty hallways, I realized something. It didn't matter how it started with him walking into my room unannounced. What mattered was where it led, to honesty, to vulnerability, to love. Love that wasn't perfect, but ours. And maybe that was enough. So, what do you think? Sweet? Emotional? Or maybe a little too real? Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if your neighbor walked into your room like that? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more BL Webtoon breakdowns and true gay love stories. Check the description for full story links and more BL recommendations.